like everything, we'll probably see a period of disappointment that this hasn't taken all of our jobs and changed the world in a month's time as attention goes elsewhere. But I think that's probably when the real work of implementing it in places, using it, stretching it begins. Like we're already seeing, I think in the Discord for the ChatGPT use, they've already started trialing a waitlist for a professional version that has greater uptime, different access to prompts, different integrations. So you're already starting to see that refinement happening faster past the initial hype cycle than you normally do.
Welcome to Punchy by Rival, where we take the gloves off to share the hard-hitting realities of the challenger marketing world. Each week, we'll break down the buzz and cut through the BS of the top stories and trends to tell you what you really need to know and do differently to grow your brand and career. All right, we are back with our first episode of Punchy for 2023. We're going to change things up a little bit. We did some thinking over the holiday break and are trying to really focus in what we hope is the core value and what we've heard from a lot of you on what is the core value of this podcast, which is really taking a story that is really relevant, a topic that everyone's talking about, that all marketers kind of need to know about, and just giving you our take on it. I mean, to be honest, that's kind of what this is us sharing our perspective and opinions and recommendations that may or may not be maybe slightly contrarian to what you hear in other places about the topics that really matter to marketing today. So what we're going to do is change things up, not drastically, but we are going to, instead of trying to cover a bunch of different stories of what's happening every week, we're going to try to focus in on the one that we think is most relevant based on the conversations that we are having, give you a bit of a brief on that topic, go into a couple reference articles, and then actually get into the meat of the conversation, which will be us sharing our perspective, love, hates about what that topic is. So hope that works. Would love to hear your feedback on the new format, and let's get into it. So today we are going to talk about ChatGPT, and we're going to talk about ChatGPT because I don't know what happened. Obviously, this came out a little while ago, GPT 3. Dubose, when was it? Do you remember when they first released it? October, November?
3 was, I think October, November, but I think 4 is on the cusp. So it might have been a little while ago further back.
So been around for a while, and I don't know if it's just me, but every conversation I've had, I'm not even joking, on Tuesday and Wednesday, literally every meeting that I had, somebody brought up ChatGPT. So for whatever reason, it's kind of made its way into the marketing water cooler, and everybody's talking about it. So we thought that we would do a bit of a deep dive into, well, really not a deep dive, but an overview on ChatGPT and talk about what we see as the opportunities, challenges, key things to keep in mind for marketers and brands out there. So if you haven't come across ChatGPT yet, we definitely recommend that you go check it out. But to summarize and set some context for this conversation, so OpenAI first released GPT-3 in an attempt to demonstrate that AI can write almost as perfectly as a human can. While they fixed all the flaws and bugs in time to launch GP4, which is likely going to come at some point this year, it's been trained on relationships between sentences, words, parts of words, ingesting huge amounts of content. Basically, it is the best AI content generator that we've seen so far. Actually, our own senior consultant, Catherine The Rock Long, created an article entirely written by AI that you can read on our site, and there's lots of other examples of this out there, including, and we're going to link to this in the show notes, Mint Mobile, and we actually had the CMO of Mint Mobile, Aaron North, on Scratch earlier this week. Mint Mobile just put out a TV ad where Ryan Reynolds reads an ad that he had ChatGPT write for Mint Mobile. So really, today we're going to talk about what it means for you right now as a marketer and what it means for brands in the marketing industry going forward. So a couple reference stories that we're going to link to. One from theweek.co.uk that talks about ChatGPT, generative AI, and the future of creative work. And I definitely have some thoughts on how I think it's going to be disrupting our industry. New York Times, really good, lengthy article about chatbots being driven by AI and ChatGPT and all the implications on not just marketing, but also other industries and really some of the ethical and social concerns that have been raised around that. And then lastly, how you can actually use ChatGPT for marketing from smart insights. So all the different tactical things that you can do differently with this technology right now. So that is the overview. That sets the scene. Dubose, we're going to start with you. What are your thoughts on this?
So I think it's one of those things where we're sitting with the conversation right now is what we see with a lot of different technology, especially when it's applied to marketing and wider culture. First, you get excited about the technology. The technology becomes a prop, especially in things like marketing, like we're seeing with the Mint Mobile ad. And then later on, quietly, more use cases come out of it. I think the technology is what's sold. The use is what provides value. I think this is incredibly exciting. I think the thing that really drives home for me though is this is just a moment in the technology's development. I think it's intriguing that as you mentioned, we're on the third operational model powering all of this, waiting for the fourth to come out soon. But really, it only took hold when there was a UI put on front of it. Once you get kind of the chat bit, that's when everybody kind of sees that this is something that they can get more out of it, simplifying it so that more people can interact with the technology. And I think that's a really, really interesting thing. I think like metaverse conversation before this, like kind of what we saw with Dolly and subtle diffusion or stable diffusion a few months ago, I think there's going to be a lot of excitement before there becomes a lot of very clear uses. But I think we're in a phase of creative exploration and experimentation with it. And I think just like everything, approaching this with an open attitude, thinking about what it can be, not just what it is right now, and how it can fit into different marketing tasks or kind of different creative tasks is going to be exciting. So I think, like everything, we'll probably see a period of disappointment that this hasn't taken all of our jobs and changed the world in a month's time as attention goes elsewhere. But I think that's probably when the real work of implementing it in places, using it, stretching it begins. Like we're already seeing, I think in the Discord for the ChatGPT use, they've already started trialing a waitlist for a professional version that has greater uptime, different access to prompts, different integrations. So you're already starting to see that refinement happening faster past the initial hype cycle than you normally do.
Jenna, first takes?
I don't know. I don't really get the hysteria around this. I think hysteria is kind of the right word. I feel like, but I don't know. This definitely reminds me of like the Pokemon Go augmented reality frenzy. Like, yeah, I don't know. I think this is probably significantly more useful and like cooler than like the Pokemon Go augmented reality thing. But yeah, I'm with Dubose where it's like where there's going to be this hype period, and then like the hype will die down a little bit, and slowly in the background it'll kind of like progress on. Snapchat still does awesome augmented reality stuff, and like that technology like continues to kind of like go places. But again, I think that like it's a little bit the actual mechanics of it are a little bit beyond the conception of like most marketers, and that it's not integrated already. That we didn't grow up, this generation of marketers like didn't grow up with these expectations, so it's going to be increasingly difficult for us to integrate it into our toolkits. And I think that this like it's the Google killer. It kind of reminds me of like when everybody was pitching their startup as like the Uber of X, where just because like that was like the household name that like everybody had a conception of what that was. But I don't see that this is like gonna kill Google. Google's innovation, like in the early days of Google, was that it had developed a monetization model for its ads that was like different and original within like the ad space, and that the search indexing it did was built on a genuine piece of technical innovation that they could do better mapping and server load distribution of the work required to index large portions of the internet. Not that like that Google was like so good because like a search engine was like, well, there were other search engines, right? Like ChatGPT or like really like generative AI. There are other generative AIs that do other things, and so saying automatically it's going to be ChatGPT or OpenAI that like kills Google when like it wasn't just that Google was a search engine, it was that Google did certain things technically very well and developed a monetization strategy that was really huge. I don't know that OpenAI will do that. Like it's yet to be proven that like so that these use cases are directly things that people will pay for and like can be monetized kind of deal. It's cool. It's obviously incredible. It's just on a philosophical human level, it's fucking amazing that we can do this. Like it's pretty like mind blowing, but on a practical marketing level, like I don't know. I'm not losing my mind over this. Are you guys? Like,
There's a very few things that you actually lose your mind over, aren't there? It's like Jack White,
yeah,
retro motorcycles, I
Yeah.
mean, what else? What else is there? Sometimes, actually,
Yeah.
some really well
Gonzaga
executed
basketball.
advertising campaigns. I feel like you lose your mind over
I
those as
do.
well.
I do like a well executed
Yeah,
activity.
you just
No,
need to combine all those things together.
conceptually, this is lose your mind cool over like
Right,
what
but
this
practically.
represents. Yeah, but like practically for marketing, and this is not lose your
So
mind
what
over
about, I
this.
think a lot of the use cases, a lot of what people are talking about is AI, writing content. But what about kind of on the performance and potentially analytics side of things? I don't really know, but do you see or do you foresee kind of implications for how this is going to be used on that side of the marketing fence? Jen, I'll start with you.
Well, I mean, like Chat GPT specifically,
Sure.
probably a little bit in the sense that you can write Excel macros with this thing, right? Like, which is
Mm.
great because I like hated that. Like, do you remember? I remember when it was a point of professional distinction if somebody like had the skills to like write in VBA, right? Like, can you imagine like how great it's going to be to like never have to learn Visual Basic to learn Excel macros? Like, that's huge. I forget. I think it was this kind of sketchy, not sketchy, the Smart Insights article where they put out like a survey of like how many people were using like machine learning and AI like already within their marketing. Because outside of Chat GPT, there's tons of use cases that are already extant that already have solutions within like the analytics and business intelligence field that people just don't use. I think largely because of, like the generation of marketers that has control over these things. Those are not native tools to like the generation that currently owns these things. And it can be a little bit different to wrap your head around conceptually. So I don't necessarily know that it's Chat GPT, but like, machine learning and automation for your comms, for things like lead scoring and like, value assessments of your target audience. Those are already here, but to a smaller portion of the market, I think, than, people could be taking advantage of them.
I think to that point, there's a really interesting thing about the difference between AI and machine learning here, right? Like,
Yeah.
I think it's funny because I think people are losing their shit over the idea this is more like AI than some of the examples seen before, which are much more useful examples of machine learning, right? Like at the end of the day, the only difference between the two is proactivity. What can kind of insights can be generated through machine learning? The AI interface and sense that we're getting from ChatGPT is much more, I've given you a question and you figured out what data set to go to. You figured out what skill set to use. And I think that's the bit that, is the icing on top of a cake that's taken a very long time to make and has a lot of disparate pieces to it. The idea to the coding point that you can just throw code at it and go, I kind of want this thing is amazing. The idea that it can do code reviews is incredible. But I think the thing that strikes me, it's quite funny, is, asking a robot to do code is kind of like going to play on its home court. There's the interesting thing that it's much easier to learn how to write out a VBA macro than it is to learn how to speak English, despite the idea that at certain times VBA seemed much more intractable. And I think, the thing here is what we are seeing is the first step in probably greater conversational interface to data sets, to knowledge, to insights that's generated by advances in machine learning, but it's just getting a wrapper around it that makes it more accessible. So you're not having to go learn how to do TensorFlow. You're not learning how to kind of build things in Python. You're not doing deep learning models. You're getting all of that power, but you're getting it at your fingertips.
So, Dubose, I wanted to ask you about your perspective on how you see this influencing the creative field in particular. So, we've talked about kind of how those real lower value, small adjustment development type things on the copy and content side, this could clearly eat away at that. But when you talk about the higher value creative work being done, I know you have perspective on that. You look at the Mint Mobile ad, and that's not really an ad by ChatGPT or conversational AI. It's kind of like making fun of itself. But how do you see this playing out when it comes to the creative side of the industry?
So I think there's a few important distinctions there. I think the Mint Mobile ad is an ad about ChatGPT, not an ad from ChatGPT. And I think, you're going to see a lot of that where it's a foil. You already see that on Twitter where you kind of go, I went and asked Dolly to do a human version of the Futurama cast. And you're kind of like, could have been generated by an AI, probably just generated by somebody with Photoshop or Blender in a few minutes. But I think it is that wrapper as a foil of, hey, look, there's creativity and it's over here and it's a player in kind of our creative process. I think to the point of like true interaction with the creative process, I think it's going to play a role more and more in that. I don't think it's going to fundamentally change the structure of how we do things. I think it's going to speed it up. If you look at the creative process as a whole, like let's go 10 years back to advertising agencies, old school ones, let's say. And, the interesting thing here is most creative floors are pyramid shaped. So you've got an army of junior creatives, junior art directors, junior copywriters. You've got some creative directors and associate creative directors. Then you've got an executive creative director. Down to the idea that all you're really doing there is generating a ton of content against a brief that's gone into the creative floor, testing and vetting those concepts based on someone's experience, based on someone's editorial eye. And then a lot of the time passing that up to another level of learning and authorization in an ECD that's going to go, hey, this is going to work, this isn't. These are the responses that come out of the creative floor to a brief. I think the interesting thing when you look at things like ChatGPT, when you look at things like DALL-E, Stable Diffusion, what you're seeing is the ability to generate tons of concepts off a prompt very quickly. Aside from consumption of booze and cigarettes, I don't see a really big difference between that and junior creatives in a way. They're being asked to do the same thing. Here's a prompt, go think about different ways to visualize things. I do think, depending on how you define creativity, there's definitely still an advantage for people doing that. But the loop that AI runs on, this idea of a learning model where you create, you understand what's working, what isn't, you refine and you keep going, that's just the creative process, especially in advertising, responding to briefs, seeing what's working, seeing what gets out of the building, seeing what's working with consumers, and then responding, iterating, creating, and pushing further. There's always going to be off-the-wall ideas that humans can do that AI can't. It's why it's hard to teach artificial intelligence how to play games like Go. But at the end of the day, I think, if you can get 100 or 1,000 ideas scamped from prompts that you had in a creative meeting or a briefing with clients, take those away and refine them, then I think you have a useful partner you're putting in the industry. It's not going to put creative industries out of business anytime soon, but I think what it's going to do is get them a hell of a lot better at their jobs and a hell of a lot faster.
Do you think, or what are the odds that we're going to have a ChatGPT written Super Bowl ad this year? Because the Mint Mobile one, granted it's kind of like a meta ChatGPT ad, but he did actually have it write a script that he wrote. So it's not a full-on ad created by AI, but the script that's in the ad was created by AI. But you think it's going to happen at this Super Bowl?
Oh, I mean, someone's going to claim to have done it. Like at the end of the day, did the copy in the Mint mobile ad come completely out of ChatGPT, not get changed at all, and then get read out? Like I
know someone we can ask. The CMO over there.
I think we should find out because I would argue there's going to be a little bit. Are we going to phone him right now? Has this become like a morning radio drive time show?
Well, no, he lives in LA, so he's probably not awake yet. We should have had him on this episode. That would have been great.
There you go. But I think, the interesting thing is there's probably still somebody who tweaks some of the copy, trim things down, put stuff there. The editorial value of taking raw creativity and polishing it is something that can still be layered on top of this and something that for the time humans are better at. To the point of the Super Bowl, most certainly. Now, will it actually be written by it? Obviously, no way in hell. I think it's going to be, there was years ago, a machine learning model that generated a script for a sci-fi film, like a 10-minute sci-fi film after being fed thousands of sci-fi films, and they made it, and it was materially terrible. Like, I think the actors nearly called it abuse, having to read the lines. And I think at the end of the day, we've gotten better at this, but I think for something like the Super Bowl, you're going to see creatives that are going to leverage this as a foil. They're not going to leverage this as a tool at this point.
All right, Jenna, any last thoughts or perspectives from you?
I don't know. Because I really worry about going off the deep end on this. It's I understand we want this to be useful for marketing. And I kind of generally broadly agree. I definitely agree with everything Dubo said about the exercise that ChatGPT or pretty much any generative AI is fundamentally not different enough from what a bunch of junior creatives would do in kind of developing ideas. And I can't believe I'm about to say this in public. I read an article by Noam Chomsky in The Atlantic. That's the worst thing I've ever heard. We're going
to clip that. That's going to be the teaser for the episode.
We're going to bleep The Atlantic. So it's just an article from Noam Chomsky. And
No. Now I'm really red. Anyways, I read an article by Noam Chomsky in The Atlantic that actually I think is like is relevant and interesting. Oh, I'm such a but I think that ultimately the kind of like the usefulness of these types of generative AIs that's based on deep learning and machine learning models that basically just take and develop statistical associations between like large amounts of data is an imperfect descriptor of what actually goes on in like the human brain, right? When we develop concepts, that reducing what humans do to associationism or association between concepts, which is largely what kind of like deep learning and neural networks do, is insufficient. And the reason that we've kind of arrived at this place is because that's what we know how to do. That's what we know how to do scientifically. That's what we know how to do from a computer and statistical analysis perspective, is those types of associations. But ultimately, it's just going to be insufficient. And so I think that, while this is an incredible tool and an incredible step forward in kind of, the force magnification of what it can do from a creative perspective, but again, ultimately, and it will certainly displace lots of people and many, many jobs, that as we become more used to this tool and technology, we will understand its limitations as still being so far from artificial intelligence and like kind of the marvel of human creativity. That's why I'm kind of like, like it's a big thing, it's a big seismic shift for us, but I still think that we're so far from what humans are actually capable of doing, even though this is an incredible marvel. I don't know, that's a very philosophical point, but that's my 2 cents.
So we had one of our Rival roundtables in London earlier this week. A dozen CMOs or growth executives around the table, and we asked this question as the icebreaker because it's been talked about so much. What are people's perspectives? And I think the general consensus was wait and see what happens, wait and see what the opportunities are. And I think that's largely right. It's more about reacting to real opportunities when they're there than trying to predict the future. It's more the fast follower than the first mover type of thing, particularly when it comes to marketing for the sake of growing your business versus marketing for the sake of marketing, and all the shit that we've seen with like NFTs and metaverse and all that stuff that's just within this echo chamber of the advertising industry, and nobody actually cares about it. And it's not actually growing brands and businesses. I think the one build that I would put on that, and kind of my 2 cents or my recommendation for people listening, is I think that you should get your hands dirty and actually play around with this stuff. So it's down or at capacity right now, but make sure that you actually get your own first person on-hand perspective of the technology, play around with it, maybe test it out within your own business as well. All right, to wrap things up, rants and or raves. Dubose, what are you particularly passionate about this week?
Given the conversation we've just had, I think I am passionate about the use cases for this and where it's going to go. Like, I think I would love to use my raving time to go. I think while we're going to get a lot of really crap output around things in generative AI and a lot of kind of foil-based advertising, I would say I'm ready to rave about the first company that or the first agency that uses this to start generating ads while they're talking to clients in the background, or starts to basically test out copywriting and tone by generating copy as you're doing brand planning dynamically. I think, one of the things I'm ready to rave about in something like this isn't the first ad that mentions ChatGPT that's good. It's going to be all the good ads that have been empowered by generative AI in the process. So we got there faster, we did more, and it was more relevant. So that's my rave for the week. But it's like a post-dated rave. It's going to work later on when this is actually useful. Let's open it up. It's like Back to the Future, where, the guy shows up and he's like, we've been holding onto this letter for like 100 years, and it's from Doc, and they're like, Doc's alive and he's in the past. Into the Back to the Future 2 before Back to the Future 3. Like, that's the Back to the Future was a franchise, Jenna, that had Christopher Lloyd. He went back in time. Huey Lewis was a singer. He did the soundtrack. He's mentioned in American Psycho. It was also a movie. But generally, that's the situation I would like to evoke with this.
Very, very graceful exit from your.
I know you joke about this, but I did not see the Back to the Future movies until I was like well into my 30s. I did not see those as a kid.
I thought you were 29.
No, absolutely not. I would never. I'm 100% in my 30s. I would never be one of those people that's like, I'm 29 perpetually. 30s, here for it. all my rants. I can't use any of my rants after I pulled out that Noam Chomsky line because I wanted to talk about supply chain traceability, and I can't talk about Chomsky and supply chain traceability in the same thing.
I
That's
think you
just
just
not
like
a.
saying Chomsky.
I do. That's 100% true. I have a philosophy degree. There's a very limited number of use cases in which it's useful and practical to bring it up, and I try to take advantage of them at every opportunity that I'm given. Yeah, I don't know. I guess my AI rant is just going to be like, say, like people that insist that it is like AI and like not just like machine learning kind of deal. Yeah, like my favorite line out of this whole thing like was when that Google engineer got fired because he was 100% convinced that the Google chat was like a real person, and that somebody had pointed out, which I had never considered before. It was genuinely a mind blown moment of that the Turing test depends on the intelligence of the human on the other end of the Turing test. And I'm like, oh my God, that's so true. Where like there's going to be a whole stupid segment of our society where like we are already like past what constitutes AI for those people. But then there's another segment of society where we're like just like not there yet. So I guess my rave is the increasing stratification, or excuse me, my rant is the increasing stratification of our society on the basis of educational attainment as to how we understand these tools. And also when some people at our roundtable say, I think that universities should focus more on teaching people programming and coding skills because it's not as if the only answer to the reality we're all about to face is like liberal arts and interrogatory, like critical thinking skills that we now desperately need. I don't know. That was a good rant. I'm gonna end on that.
I'm going to go ask ChatGPT to make a Noam Chomsky article in the style of the Kids Supplement from USA Today because he needs to leave the Atlantic. He needs to go other places.
This was an old one. This was from like 10 years ago. I'll put it in our.
I was going to say he's got to be what, like mid 90s now.
He's really old. Yeah, he's really really old now. But this one is was pretty old. But it's still relevant. Actually, it's still relevant because like the basic approach that we've taken in machine learning and AI hasn't really changed. And there's apparently some sort of like debate among like the titans of the AI industry about like a different approach that we have to take to neural networks versus signification. I don't know. I'm still learning about it.
So the key takeout we have from this is Noam Chomsky is like the Dread Pirate Roberts. He never dies. Someone else just takes the title and carries on.
Yeah.
All right. With that, we're going to wrap it up. We did it. Our first Punchy episode of 2023. Thanks for listening. See you next week. Punchy is a production of Rival. We are a growth consultancy that builds challenger brands, strategies, and capabilities to disrupt categories. If you want to learn more about us, check out wearerival.com. If you want to connect with Jenna, Dubose, or myself, email us at media@wearerival.com or find us on LinkedIn. If you enjoyed today's show, please subscribe, share with anyone you think might enjoy it, and leave us a review. Thanks so much for listening, and see you next week.